Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Paul Garner. I'm the online campus pastor for Audacious Church, and you're about to watch an incredible message recorded at our Manchester campus in the UK. If you want to know more about our church, visit audaciouschurch.com. But don't forget, you do not want to miss out on the incredible content that we are bringing to you. So make sure you subscribe and enjoy.
So good to have our Geneva campus watching online. Why don't you give them a little wave? So good to have you all here with us today. And if you're watching online, it's so great to have you. Julie and I were away just last weekend. We were celebrating our 28th wedding anniversary. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have done so well. And we were driving away, and you know what it's like when you're on a journey, and it was a long journey. We were going down to Devon, and it's just motorway and signs, and you're watching the miles go down and the hours go down, and then you're watching the signs, because the signs help us find out where it is we're supposed to be going, and they tell us when we know we've arrived in the right space. Signs are incredible things. I love a good sign. Let's just from on watch the screens. Here's a great sign. Here you go. This one caught me the other day. Like, for real? If you get there, how do you know you've got there? How do you know that where you're there is not where you're supposed to be? I mean, it's next one. Give me the next sign. I actually driven around the roundabout that sign's on. I nearly crashed my car looking at it. Serious? Next one. This is a place Julie hopes one day we'll move to. Next one. That is a philosophical conundrum. If I've read it and taken in what it said, has it been a sign? And this is my final one before I move on. Take that down because my mother's in the next service. So, who has ever prayed, okay? Who has ever prayed, Lord, hang on, I haven't asked you what you've prayed yet. Not just in general. Ever prayed? Oh, yeah, we're in church. Who's ever prayed specifically, Lord, give me a sign? I think it's a real familiar prayer, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. God, if you could just show me the way, if you could just tell me what to do with a sign that changes everything. We're talking about the Christmas story, and the Christmas story in these great journeys, the greatest, probably the longest journey of them all, is these wise men, these kings who the Bible tells us come from the east to worship Jesus, and they follow let's try that again, they follow the star. It's interesting to me and obvious when you think about it that men who look at stars for a living, God would speak to them through the stars. You see, God is not about showing you a sign in the heavens, He's about giving you a sign in your life. Because the wise men, that was what they did day by day. That was their working job. They examined the signs in the star. They looked at the stars and they tried to look at what it all meant. God is interested in each and every one of our lives and the journey that He calls us to go on. And He's not waiting for you to get to somewhere where there's less light pollution so you can see the stars. He wants to talk to you in your ordinary, everyday life. If you work in a shop, there's signs in a shop. If you work in a shop floor, there's signs on the shop floor. If you work in a family, your children will give you signs. They'll be mixed and varied at different times. In all of these moments in our lives, God is interested in taking you from where you are to becoming everything He's called you to be. He uses the power of His signs through our lives. Verse 2 reads like this. We saw his star, says these wise men, when it rose, and we have come to worship him. Let me tell you what you don't do with a sign. You don't worship the sign. Just because there was a moment or an encounter, just because there was a time when you saw this thing and it was so clear what your life was about, don't make the sign the place of worship. Don't make the sign what you center your life around. I've had so many conversations as a pastor where someone has come and said, oh, let me tell you about this time that God really spoke to me. And the whole of their life is stuck in a time loop around that sign, around that one moment. And God's like going, there is more in the journey of your life than this sign you once had. The purpose of the encounter of the sign is to change your life. Just pause for a moment with me and think about these wise men, these astrologers. They were so moved by this sign, they did 4 things really quickly. Number 1, they interrupted their own lives. They decided this was so powerful, we can't keep doing what we've always been doing. If this is really God, I can't keep doing what I have always been doing. Number 2, the second thing they did was this. They prepared for a journey. They realized, not only can I not keep doing what I'm doing, I can't keep doing what I'm doing here. They prepared for a journey, and then they purchased or prepared the gifts. Listen, those gifts that we skimmed through in the Bible, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they weren't something they picked up on the way in budgeons. They weren't just passing through a town and thought, you know what can we bring? They knew who they were going to see, and they brought the appropriate gifts. And then fourthly, what did they do? They took a bearing on the star. It's only when I read it, again, in preparing for today, that I realized the wise men did not follow the star to Jerusalem. It's not in the Bible. The wise men saw the star, they interpreted what it meant, and they went to Jerusalem. There's nowhere that says they followed the star to Jerusalem. Just because you've seen a sign doesn't mean the sign is what you're supposed to see. A friend of mine told me a story just last week. He said he was traveling, and as he's traveling into this town that has got no church whatsoever, he feels God speak to him. And he says, God spoke to me and said, there's a house with a red door. Go and knock on the red door in the square and ask the lady in the house if she's prepared to start a church in that house. He said, so I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. Drove to the house, drove to the square, drove around the square, one house, whole square, red door. Walks up to the red door, knocks on the red door, lady opens the door. Well, that's all going well so far. And he says to the lady, excuse me, have you been praying about starting a church? So she looks at him, she goes, I have been praying. I asked God to send me a sign. He said, I am the sign. Because the moment is to move you, not to make you feel good. It's not the feel good of the encounter, it's the change in your life. It's not that God is real and you can go, oh wow, now I know God is real. It's that God being real changes everything. But let me say this as well. Just because you saw a sign doesn't mean you've got to the right place. These kings, these wise men, they make their way to Jerusalem. Now, if you're looking for the king of the Jews, going to the capital city of the Jewish kingdom makes absolute sense. So they go to Jerusalem because that's how they've interpreted the sign. And because they're looking for a king, they go to the palace because that's how you would interpret the sign. But their interpretation of the sign has taken them to the wrong place. Can I say to some of you today, you're desperately trying to hold in somewhere because you felt God say something to you and you misinterpreted it. So you're holding on to something that ultimately could be the biggest distraction of your life because you read a sign a certain way and then you interpreted the sign and positioned yourself. Just because you saw a sign doesn't mean you went to the right place. They stand in the middle of Herod's palace and they get a conversation with the king. And we know the conversation because we've read the Christmas story. And they say to Herod, "Hey, Herod, where is the one born king of the Jews?" And Herod's like, "It's me, right? No, we've seen his sign. His sign and your sign, those signs don't match." Herod's rattled by it. We know the story. Herod is so rattled by this. He goes, "Hey, where?" Goes to his wise men. "Where should he be born? The Messiah, the King of the Jews." They go, "Oh yeah, Herod, Micah. It's in the book of Micah. He's going to be born in Bethlehem." Right. So Herod leaves this place to have a conversation. A friend of mine was going to preach in a place called Royston. He turned up in Royston and he's driving up and down the main road. Royston's a tiny little town. He's driving up and down the main road of Royston and he goes, he phones the guy he's coming to preach for. He says, "I can't find the church." He says, "No, it's on the high street." He says, "I'm driving up and down the high street." He says, "I can't see the church." He says, "What's wrong with you? It's right there on the high street. It's the biggest building on the high street. It's not here. It's just three down from the cinema. I can't find the cinema." They do this conversation for 15 minutes. And he says, you can't see anything on the high street. "Where are you?" "I'm in Royston." "Which Royston are you in?" "Cambridgeshire." "Which Royston are you in?" "Yorkshire." Just because you've seen a sign and found a king doesn't mean you are where God has positioned you. Just because it seems to line up. Listen, God doesn't want you to live a life that seems to line up. He wants you to live life and life to the full. He wants you to live life where he lines all things to work together for our good. He wants to prepare everything to shape and help you. Because we should never confuse a king with the king. Never confuse a king with the king. Herod had all the trappings of king. A palace, a throne, a queen, princes and princesses, courtiers, clothes, a crown. And yet, he wasn't the one born king of the Jews. When he was born to be king. When Jesus was born king. He wasn't waiting for someone else to die to step into his kingdom. He was already in his kingdom. But we can see something and think this is the king. And we find ourselves just off course. In his book Atomic Habits, James Clear writes this: imagine a plane taking off from Los Angeles to go to New York. If the pilot adjusted the course by 3.5 degrees, the plane would move a few centimeters and no one would notice. However, throughout the journey, the impact of that little change would be tremendous, to the point where the plane would land in Washington, D.C. instead of New York, a distance of 230 miles. Sometimes we think we're right in line, and yet we find ourselves, because we thought we found the king, we found a king. We thought we found the one to give us the right advice and the right shaping. We thought we'd found the one who could interpret the sign. You see, when the wise men came to Herod, they had a sign. But when they met Herod, they got a word. Where's he going to be born? Micah 5:2. Bethlehem Ephrathah. Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, and whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. They had seen a sign, they hear a word. And then they do something, and I think this is the crucial something. They just go a little bit further. The journey that these wise men have been on is probably, and we say probably because there's a lot of guesswork in it, but we think they came from southern Iran, southern Iraq. And they've been on a journey over what we call the Fertile Crescent. They've gone from Iran and Iraq up through those countries, across the top in Turkey, and they've come down through Syria into the Promised Land, into Israel, down to Jerusalem. It's probably a 2-year journey. And they arrive to meet Jesus in Jerusalem. Bethlehem is 5 miles south of Jerusalem. It is just a little further. Like if you've done a 2-year journey and you get to within 5 miles of the whole thing, you're not going to think to yourself, oh, we missed it. I mean, come on, we have invested all this time, all this energy. We've absolutely given ourselves to it, but we missed it. Let's go home. You're going to go, wow, we are that close. We are that close to hitting the very thing that we set out to discover. Can I say to you, you are that close. For some of the things you've been believing for, you are that close. For some of the hopes and dreams of your life, you are that close. For the thing you have oriented your life around, bringing that change, bringing that transformation, you are that close. Some of you are moments from a miracle. In the grand scheme of your life, you are moments from a miracle. You're moments from a health miracle. You're moments from a financial miracle. You're moments from a family miracle. Someone you believe for time after time after time. You are moments from the miracle. Don't turn back now. Just go a little bit further. Just make the decision. I'm not going to back off when I could be that close. These wise men, they make this journey. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And then it says this, the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. They'd seen the sign. They had the word. Now they could follow the sign to the destination. Because if you'd followed the sign all the way, that would have been all you would have been bothered about. But you've got to anchor your life in the Word of God. You've got to anchor your life in everything He talks to, everything He challenges you on, everything He asks you to do. Anchor it in the Word. And they followed the star. This is verse 10 for you. It says this. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Why? Because it was the final bit they needed to get them on the last bit of the journey. They just needed something more to go a little bit further. And I'm believing in this, the last 5 minutes of this message, that God is going to speak to you with that something more to get you that little bit further. That's something more that confirms what you've been believing. That gives you that hope that God is moving and shaping your life. That He's called you for a purpose. That your life is not about existence and death. but it is about life to the full, and it is about life with a purpose. For every single one of us in the room, God has got a purpose and a plan for your life. If all we do is follow a sign, then we'll miss the purpose. But when we root the sign in the scripture, then God will take us that little bit further to find that point where we get to where he wants us to be. The sign led these kings to kneel before a baby. By this point, Jesus is probably not in the tableau that we see at Christmas. He's probably not a baby. Herod certainly believed that Jesus might be as old as 2. Else, why commit the genocide that he did? They come and find a toddler. Can you imagine for a moment trying to bow down to a toddler? Can you imagine the chaos of that? And yet these wise men, these kings, these astronomers meet Jesus and bow in worship. There's no throne. There's no glamour. They have left the palace behind, but they know that they have met the King, the one born King. They have met him. And the only thing they can do when they meet him is kneel and worship. All they can do is put their gifts before him and bow down and worship. We need to meet Jesus. We don't need to do church. We need to meet Jesus. Why do we gather? So that together we meet Jesus. So that together we have this moment where his presence is in the room and we go, God, there is no doubt that right now it looks like a venue, but Jesus is there. It probably looked like a house or a cave, but Jesus was there. And because Jesus was there, the only response was to worship. The only response of the wise men was to go, oh my goodness, he might not look like, feel like anything I may have considered, but he is who he is. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. He is the most beautiful in all of things. He is Jesus. He is the one before whom we take off our crowns and we lay them down and we say, you are the King. You are above it all. It doesn't matter that you don't fit what I think. You are Jesus, the Messiah, the one who reigns. He doesn't need a throne to prove his kingship. He has our lives because he is enthroned in the midst of his people. So when we sing and we worship, he is enthroned in that moment by us gathering around him. If you're not standing, why don't you stand to your feet? We're going to sing in just a moment. Because the only appropriate response is worship. The only response in the midst of their journey was to bow down and worship. The story of the kings finishes with a strange little moment. They have a dream. And it says, don't go back to Herod, protecting Jesus. But I think it tells us more. It tells us this. When we meet Jesus, we cannot go back the way we came in. We cannot return to our lives just like we did church. We cannot return to our lives just like it was another morning out. When we meet Jesus, we've got to go back a different way. We've got to be changed. So we're going to worship just for a moment. My time is gone, but we're going to worship for a moment. If you want to take your mask off to sing, you can. We're going to worship him. So before Matt and Amy lead us, come on, why don't we raise our hands before the King? We have brought our gifts of finance. We're bringing our gifts of food. But let's bring the gift of our lives. And just as we sing, why don't you lay your life down again before the King? Lay your life down one more time before the King. You know, Christmas is such an easy time to invite people to church to meet Jesus. Lay your life down and decide whose life you are going to bring to encounter Jesus. You can feel the weight of the Holy Spirit sat in the room right now, because he is touching your life. If you're something that you feel like you've not quite got to yet, I want to encourage you, in this moment, God is going to speak to you. He's going to speak to you with utter clarity, and he's going to bring a breakthrough.